left-hand side of the screen a map of the world with the global GDP growth during the last years given by the International Monetary Fund. The source that I use for these figures are the same of the last presentation, so you will see that figures are completely linked. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the crude steel production growth rate given by World Steel Association. So we will start a review from 1999. If you want to go before that figure, you can enter into the web page of the International Monetary Fund and find all these maps. So starting in 1992, you can find that a lot of countries all around the world were painted in an orange color. That means that these countries were in recession with a negative GDP growth. There are some countries with a blue color, like Argentina, for example, or India, that at that year, they have a very small growth between 0 and 3%. Those countries with a light green color were growing between 3 and 6%, and with a strong green color you can find, for example, China growing between 6 and 10%, and finally there are other countries like Argentina or Saudi Arabia growing at a pace higher than 10%. So taking into account that the picture in 1991 was mainly orange or with an important quantity of orange countries, you can realize that the crude steel production that year decreased 3.7%. Next year, situation slightly improved with some economies slightly recovering, like the States, and then the crude steel production growth rate was only minus 2.1%. 1993 and 1994 were years where the green color started to appear in the map, and then the crude steel production was stagnated with a let's say, growth very close to 0. But in 1995, orange color started to decrease in the picture of the world, and then we enjoyed nice crude steel production rate growth of 5.6%. 96 had also a positive growth, and 97 also. So you can realize that when the green color is the predominant color all around the world, the crude steel production increased. In 1998, we have a small decrease of minus 2.6% in the crude steel production that anticipates some problems that we had in some countries in 1999, where you can see that, for example, South America and Mexico decreased its growth in this year. So for the next year, from year 2000 until 2007, you will see that the GDP growth all around the world was mainly green, and we enjoyed during this period a very nice crude steel production growth rate. Of course, we arrived to 2008, the crisis. That year only, as the main economy that entered into recession was the States, but immediately the crude steel production reacted, and we have a decrease of 0.4%. 2009 was a very bad year. You can see orange color spread all around the world, and of course, a crude steel production growth rate negative of minus 8%. 2010, immediately the economies recovered, and then the crude steel production rebounded strongly up to 16%. 2011, with the green color mainly in the screen, and 2012 had a positive crude steel production growth. Also 2013, but then the crisis that we had in 2008 and 2009 have an end in W shape, and then we have a recession in 2015 again, when you can see that crude steel production again decreased minus 3%, and then orange color start to appear around the world. Situation slightly improved in 2016, but we have to wait till last year to see again how orange color disappeared off the map. And This is the picture for this year, ladies and gentlemen. This is the forecast that we saw in the previous presentation, where only small economies are in recession this year, like Venezuela, South Sudan, or Yemen, and the green color is mainly spread around the world, sharing the picture with the blue color of smaller growth for the developed economies. So with this scenario, for this year and for the next one, we can foresee that, taking into account that we will have a 3.9% GDP growth worldwide for the global economy this year and the next one, we can foresee that we will enjoy a recovery, a firm recovery in the steel demand in 2018 and also 2019. The picture remains very positive in the next year, also 2020 and 2021, the map has more or less the same color. And in 2022, according to International Monetary Fund, we will see, let's say, a landing in the Chinese economy that will grow below 6% in 2022, but we will have to wait till that year to see that the Chinese economy slows down. So let's see if the construction sector forecast is similar to what we have seen till now in the worldwide GDP. Well, I present you some information prepared by the Construction Intelligence Center in his last report made in March 2018. This institution was expecting that the global construction sector will grow at an average of 3.7% a year in the period 2018-2022. This forecast is in line with the forecast of the International Monetary Fund for all sectors of the economy, and it's expected to rise over 20% in that period. If we analyze the different areas of the world, we can find, for example, that in America, Argentina will be the most dynamic market. An improvement is also expected in construction output in the States and in Mexico, with growth between 4 and 6% in the coming years. And Canada and Brazil will have a smaller growth, let's say, between 0 and 2%. But the most important area in the world for the construction sector for us is Asia and Pacific region, because in this area we can find China, Japan, and India. The construction in these countries will slow down. The growth of the construction output will slow down. That means that we will have only growth between 4 and 6% in this area. You can find that some Asian countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand can compensate, let's say, the slowdown in the growth of the Chinese construction output, and then we will enjoy a growth between 4 and 6%, as I said before. Europe. Well, in Europe, we are used to small growths in the construction sector. During the last 4 years, the growth was only 1.3%, and according to this institute, it will almost double in the next 4 years. It will arrive to a growth of 2.5%. And finally, Africa is a small market in terms of volume of construction, but we will see the highest increase in construction output in the next years. Especially, we will find a strong growth in Nigeria and Ethiopia based on the long construction project that will be developed in the coming years. So, as I said, a growth close to 4% in GDP and in construction sector for the coming years. So I think that we will enjoy a recovery in the long products consumption during the next 2 years. But let's see how is reacting our steel industry to the beginning of 2018. Let's see if current figures are confirming the forecast that I made before for this year and the next one. Well, World Steel has recently released its new short-range outlook only last month. Then the final figure for 2017 consumption of steel, all type of steel products together, amounted 1,587 million tons. Almost 50% of this consumption of steel was in China. You can see the figure of 737 million tons in China, which is rather below 50%. So for this year, World Steel has forecasted the next two columns. The first one is the forecast made last fall that amounted 1,500 million tons, but World Steel have upgraded this April the figure up to 1,616 million tons. The main reason is the difference in the forecast for China. Last year, World Steel thought that Chinese consumption was going to slightly decrease during this year, reaching a figure of 676 million tons. But at the end, they have upgraded this forecast, and now they are thinking that the Chinese consumption of steel products will be around 737 million tons, the same figure that they had last year. It's expected a recovery in the steel consumption in other parts of the world. For example, in the developed economies, 400 and almost 20 million tons are expected for this year, 75 million tons in MENA countries, and in other parts of the world, 386 million tons. So all in all, World Steel is making a forecast of a growth of 1.8% in the steel consumption all around the world, and a more modest 0.7% for the next year, for 2019. The reason of the slowdown of the growth in the steel consumption for 2019 is also China, because World Steel thinks today that Chinese consumption will decrease 50 million tons the year 2019. The rest of the world will continue growing in the steel consumption, but China will slightly decrease. Well, this is the pattern of the forecast that World Steel has done during the last, let's say, 2 years, that is giving a forecast of a slight decrease in the Chinese consumption for the next year, and each time that upgrades or modify its forecast in a new report, they maintain the consumption of China, and they delay for the next year the expected slowdown in the Chinese consumption. So let's see if next time happens the same. The same information showing, let's say, in a map, you can find that all areas of the world will be growing in the steel consumption according to World Steel. The highest growth rate you can find in Central and South America, with a growth of 6.3%. Growth between 2 and 4% are expected in European Union, also in NAFTA countries, and higher growths are expected in Middle East, Africa, and other Europe. As I said before, in Asia and Oceania, the growth expected is only 1.1% due to the stagnation of the Chinese consumption this year, according to World Steel. For the next year, we will slow down the growth of the consumption. That doesn't mean that the consumption of steel will decrease. That means only a slowdown in the growth in the main areas of the world, with the exception of Africa. Of course, in Asia and Oceania, we can find a small negative growth of 0.2% due to the 15 million tons that World Steel forecasts for the decrease of the Chinese consumption. But what is happening in the first quarter? We have information updated of the crude steel production. So you can find in the red columns the Chinese crude steel production. The blue the blue columns represent the rest of the world crude steel production, and the gray columns are total steel production of the world. During the first quarter, the crude steel production of the world amounted 427 million tons, which means a growth of 4.1% compared to the same period of 2017. The major engine of this growth is China, for sure, because you can follow the lines that represent the growth year on year of the crude steel production, and the red line had a positive evolution of 6% January this year, 6% also in February, and 4.5% in March of this year. The blue line represents the growth of the crude steel production of the rest of the world. It's lower, but as an average, the gray line had a growth of 4.1% during the first quarter. So, ladies and gentlemen, the crude steel production in the world is growing in this first quarter of this year in line with what had happened from October 2016. If we have a look to this graph before 2016, we will realize that the lines will be below the zero axis because the crude steel production during 2015 was decreasing, as we saw at the beginning of this presentation. At the same time that crude steel production is increasing, we have seen that the efforts of the Chinese government in order to try to control and to cut, if possible, the production capacity have made its effect, and then the crude steel capacity utilization ratio have been above 70% from the beginning of the year, with a peak of 74.5% in March. It's true that we enjoy ratios above 80% some years ago, from 2000 until 2007. But nevertheless, if the Chinese efforts continue in order to take care of this environmental ambient, and if they don't increase too much the production capacity, probably we will arrive to crude steel capacity utilization ratio close to 80% during this year or maybe the next year. Some information of the crude steel production this year compared with the first quarter last year. You can realize that all areas of the world increase its production of steel, with the main exception of this country that slightly decreased. But at the same time that the crude steel production was growing all around the world, especially in China, steel export from this country have been decreasing from the peak in September 2015. You can see in the screen how all type of steel exported from China have been decreased. Now we are at a pace of around 4 or 5 million tons per month, compared with more than 10 million tons in September 2015. This drop of steel export from China has been especially relevant in long products. In the left-hand side graph, you can find in blue color the export of flat products, in red color the export of long products, green for pipe and tubes, and purple color for stainless steel. You can see that the decrease of long products has been more evident with the red surface, that decrease of a trend of around 60 million tons in the year 2015, and now is around slightly above 20 million tons per year last 2017. In the right-hand side graph, you can find the export of total steel products from China on a monthly basis from the last year. You can realize that the figure of January and February have been very low. There is a rebound in March, and let's see in the future how this figure evolves. I tried to find some information for you regarding the construction sector in China, because it's very relevant for us. China is more than 50% of the rebar consumption of the world, and what happens there is very important for the rest of the world. I didn't find any information regarding the number of permits for new dwelling, but I found this information in the National Bureau of Statistics of China. Is official information from Chinese government. I don't know how reliable it is, but well, it's the best information that we have. And I found this information of investment in real estate in China. Well, you can see that the investment in real estate is increasing because the accumulated orange columns are higher in the year 2017 compared to the previous year, but at the same time you can follow the blue line, which is the accumulated growth rate of the investment in real estate in China. And you can see that during the year 2015, the accumulated growth in real estate was decreasing, almost reached zero at the end of 2015, but from that moment, it rebounded and now is close to 10%. So we can say that the investment in real estate in China, for the time being, it's rebounded. So this will hopefully give us more consumption of rebars in China in the coming months. For the public goods, sorry, I didn't find any indicator. So I present you the figures of the investment in fixed assets that includes, of course, the investment in construction access during the last year. Here we can see that there is an increase every year, but the investment in fixed access, the accumulated growth rate here is decreasing. That's true. But ladies and gentlemen, it's decreasing from 12% in the year beginning of 2016, and now it's only at 7%. You can imagine what means a growth of 7% in the investment in fixed assets in China. This will guarantee a nice consumption of rebars in China for the coming months and maybe 1 or 2 years. So, as a consequence of the last two graphs that you saw, here you have information from the Chinese government. I hope that it's reliable, where you can see the output of the rebar sector in China in terms of tons. So Chinese mills are producing between 17 and 18 million tons per month. And the important thing is the blue line, that is the growth of this production. You can realize that during the year 2017, this production have a positive growth, and from the end of 2017 up to March, it's rebounding again. This output can be delivered in domestic deliveries or can be exported. But we hope that with the two graphs that we saw before, this production will be mainly employed in the domestic consumption. So the key point for our sector, that is the Chinese consumption of rebars, I think that I have covered with these 3 slides, and my personal opinion is that the consumption in China for rebars and for all types of loom products will maintain a strong development in the coming months. So let's move to some updated information of the long products consumption. We have a consumption of long products last year of 815 million tons. The forecast that I made in the last IREPAS meeting in Athens was only 801. So the second part of the year was better than expected, and finally we reached 850 million tons. And for this year, the growth in the first quarter has been 3.5%. So the consumption of long products has been 200 million tons. And if we extrapolate this 3.5% for the next quarters, we will find a figure of 843 million tons of long products consumption worldwide. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the highest long product consumption that we have ever enjoyed in our history. If we split this long product consumption in the different products, we can see that rebars in first quarter amounted 91 million tons, 50 million tons for wire rod, 40 million tons for sections, and 45 million tons for merchant bars. The rebars consumption last year was 376. When I made my forecast in Athens, I only gave you a figure of 370 million tons of rebars, so the reality was better than what we forecast in the last IREPAS meeting. So the growth of the different products in the first quarter has been, of course, relatively different. But if we use each growth rate for each different loan type of products, we will obtain the forecast that you can see in the screen now. For Rebars, we'll have a Rebars consumption of 391 million tons, 204 for wire rod. The growth here is very small because the growth in the first quarter has been also very poor. 56 million tons for sections and 192 million for merchant bars. The product mix has remained quite stable during the last years. Maybe only one comment can be made, that product mix has benefited Rebars against merchant bars and wire rod during the last year. So today the picture of the world of the consumption of different type of long products is what you can see in the screen. Reinforcing bars are 46% of Rebars consumption, wire rod 25% of the worldwide consumption, merchant bars 23%, and sections only 7%. Also some information regarding the consumption of long products in the different areas of the world. Asian markets account for more than 60% of total long products consumption, and China alone represents more than 55% of long products consumption. In the first quarters, we can find that the European Union apparent consumption was 15 million tons, 9 million tons in North America, 129 in Asia and Southeast Asia, 50 million tons in these countries plus Turkey, and 32 in the rest of the world. So the picture of long products consumption in the different areas of the world is East and Southeast Asia 65%, this plus Turkey 8%, rest of the world 16%, and the European Union and North America have a small weight of 7% and 5% respectively. Overall, as I said, the long products consumption has a growth of 3.5%. We can observe that advanced economies, European Union and North America, have a gradual rise, but China, Turkey, and these countries have a better performance than global average, with 3.5% and 4% growth during the first quarter. For wire rod, the growth was, let's say, very poor, with only 0.3%, mainly because in East and Southeast Asia, the consumption only increased 0.2%. For sections, the growth was only 0.5% because developed economies have dragged worldwide sections consumption during the first quarter. And finally, merchant bars was the product that had a better development during the first quarter, with a growth of 6.5%. Sorry. So let's focus on Rebars. What has happened with Rebars consumption during the first quarter? Well, the average growth was 4%, and all areas of the world enjoyed a recovery of the consumption. Of course, the most strong growth can be observed in East and Southeast Asia with 4.3%, and then other regions that, like the European Union, had a poor 0.7%. So the picture of global Rebars consumption of the world is East and Southeast Asia 63%, Turkey plus this 8%, North America 4%, European Union 5%, and rest of the world 21%. So if we try to make a forecast for the different areas of the world for the next year, taking into account the figures of the first quarter, I should say that Rebars consumption will reach, as I said before, 391 million tons, with 16 million tons in the European Union, 30 million tons in North America, 259 in East and Southeast Asia, 24 in this plus Turkey, and finally for the rest of the world, 78 million tons. Well, maybe this forecast is too optimistic because we consider only the increase in the Rebars consumption in the first quarter, but I am convinced that if we don't achieve 391 million tons this year, we will surpass in 2019 the figure of 400 million tons of Rebars, taking into account the macroeconomic situation and the expected evolution in the Chinese consumption. So, ladies and gentlemen, be ready to hear in the next IREPAS meeting that worldwide reverse consumption will surpass 400 million tons very soon. This is a comparison between production and consumption during the first quarter. You can realize that figures are very similar in the different areas, but I would like to point out that Chinese production is very close to Chinese consumption, and this is very important for the other areas of the world that you can see that they have figures very small compared to Chinese. So what happens in China has an effect immediately in the rest of the world. If they have a problem of 5 or 10 million tons in a year, this can affect all the rest of the world. And let's finalize with a review of the international market price situation. Well, you are used to this graph because we have presenting in the IREPAS meeting for many, many years with these colors. Current prices today can be Ribas, for example, in the Mediterranean area, about $560 FOB, wire rod mesh $590, and billets $510 FOB. These are reference prices in the international market. But let's analyze the spread, the difference between the Ribas price FOB and the scrap price during the last years. The blue columns represent the Ribas price, the green, the yellow color represent, or the green color represent the scrap price CFR, and the line represent the spread. You can read the spreads at the right X of the screen, and you can realize that today spreads are between $200 and $210. Nothing special if we compare with the last years, and if we take out the year 2009 and the period of 2015 where the market was, let's say, depressed, 200 or 210 is an average spread for the rest of the year. We can observe a huge or a big increase in August, September of last year, and this is due to the effect of lack of electrodes and the increase, of course, of electrodes that, of course, the Rebar suppliers have to translate to the market. But for me, it's more interesting that the spread is to see the adjusted spread. This means the Rebar's price minus total cost of scrap to produce 1 kilo of steel. Then we multiply the scrap by 1.13, which is the yield of the scrap, and then we obtain this adjusted spread that you can see in the screen. So the adjusted spread is in line with what has happened during the last year, and in addition, the steel producers are having to support, let's say, around $30 of increase in our cost due to electrodes, ferroalloys, and refractories. So, ladies and gentlemen, the spread that we are having today is not spectacular. It's in line with what we have had during the last years. So, to make a summary of what I have said, and I would like that you remember some of these main points in my presentation. First point, we are in front of a solid long-term fundamental for the steel consumption during the next years. We expect that in 2018 and 2019 there will be a recovery of Rebar's consumption, probably surpassing historical records. Be ready to assume additional spread increase as a result of cost growth in electrodes, ferroalloys, and refractories. It's true that today the concern that the mills will stop due to lack of electrodes is not so big like it was some months ago, but it's also true that we have to pay the cost. The costs remain very high for electrodes. We will see in the next presentation if this cost will decrease in the coming years, but for the time being, you can believe that we are paying around $30 more than we have doing in the past due to electrodes, ferroalloys, and refractories. Also, we have to consider that in the near future we will have to support higher yield loss because scrap will remain expensive due to the increase of the consumption of scrap all around the world. And of course, if the demand improves, spreads probably will recover. So the spreads that we are used today of 200 or 210 will probably become in some months 220 or maybe 240 to compensate these three effects. We expect also a better balance of rebar's demand and rebar's production in the different areas of the world. If the consumption of rebars increase all around the world, and maybe rebar's tourists will decrease in the near future, and this will become a more regional business. And to finalize, also key risks to consider that are more or less the same that you heard in the last presentation. China rebar's international demand is a key factor for the profitability of the rebar's steel, and we have to follow the issue of China production in detail every month. If Chinese remain supplying their own market, this will be very healthy for the rest of the world. If they have a problem of the oversupply in some months, this can create distortions all around the world. General geopolitical tension also can change the forecast. Today, the picture is very brilliant, but who knows? In any moment, it can appear a war in the world, something that can change this forecast. And finally, the domino effect of the protectionism in some way can create a cooling down effect in the economy, and if the economy doesn't grow as expected, then the evolution of the steel consumption in the world will not be so nice as forecasted in this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jose, for the informative presentation and the positive remarks and the encouraging predictions. We may have one or two questions. If you have any for Mr. Ray. Nothing from the floor. Just a quick question. I know that you have been answering this question for the last couple of days, but what's your expectation about the negotiations during the course of this month? Will there be any conclusion by the end of the month?
I think that is completely unpredictable. Whatever I say with Trump is impossible to forecast. So I can say that probably we'll get an extension, but who knows? It's very difficult to answer this question. If I had the answer, I will not be here. You can't believe me.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Jose. Sorry. My apologies.
I have attended many conferences, but I think this is one of the best on the long products particularly. So congratulations, Mr. Jose. I'm Dr. Dhawan from India, Chevron. Well, the way it has come, it seems very shortly, since there are no capacities being added, and the way the previous presentation and what we have mentioned, well, I think we are heading towards some shortage period. I hope I'm not wrong. The raw materials, particularly the graphite electrodes, I know what it's going to be. If the demand is going to be up, the EAF route is going to be a better solution. Induction furnace is going down. How graphite electrode is going to be tackled, I think should be flagged as a major issue for the future to come. Even if there are concerns by USA, they are protecting, even if they have to go for higher production is mainly in EAF. If such raw material concerns are not addressed, there will be a problem. Lastly, I think in the whole session, the capacities addition issue, which is very, very important for investment into steel, is an area needs to be looked at, I think, quite importantly. Where from? Are there going to be additions in capacities for the long products?
Well, you mean capacities for raw materials or for crude steel production? Well, for steel production, if you remember my presentation, now we are at around 70% of crude steel production capacity utilization ratio. So we have, let's say, not 25%, because it's impossible to run a mill at 100% of capacity, but during the period of 2004 and 2007, crude steel production capacity ratio utilization was around 80-something%. So we have, let's say, 10% of extra capacity ready to be in place if needed in the coming, let's say, 2 or 3 years. Of course, if we make a forecast in 10 years' time, well, who knows, probably the steel consumption in 10 years' time will be double, which is what has happened in the last 10 years. If you have a look to figures of crude steel production 10, 15 years ago, you will find figures of 600 and something, 700 and something, and now we are close to 1,600 million tons. So, of course, in the short term, we don't need to install new capacities to cover the demand. If we speak of a long term, for sure, we'll have to increase the crude steel production in the world.
Thank you.
I wonder your personal feeling about the outcome of the possible or the investigation being initiated by EU on the safeguard. Is it going to be a tariff or a quota? What do you feel?
Well, the investigation has been initiated. You know that in Europe it's much more difficult to get an anti-dumping measures of safe work clause measures than in other countries like the States. In the States, they react immediately. In the European, it's much more difficult to get. I think that it will depend on the negotiation between the States and the European Union. If we don't reach an agreement with the States, probably we will get some measures in the European Union. But you know that the European Union is also more liberal in terms of freedom of commerce, so we will see. We will see. Probably it will depend on the result of the European Union and United States negotiation.
So it all depends on Mr. Trump eventually.
So that's why it's unpredictable, completely unpredictable what can happen.
Thank you. Last question, Dr. Ma.
Yes, Jos, it's very nice to hear your presentation. It's excellent. Can I ask you a question? From your point of view, maybe from Celsa point of view, what's the real cost impact from the increase in graphite electrode in the past, in last year, and this year, short term, long term, in the coming 5 years?
Yeah. Well, not only electrodes, because we have to add refractories as well and ferroalloys, and altogether we are speaking of a minimum $30 per ton. And I think that the rest of the steel producers are suffering the same cost increase. It's not a particular situation of Celsa, it's for everybody. As I say, so minimum $30 we can consider. You will let us know in your next presentation if these $30 are going to decrease slightly due to new capacity installations for electrodes, or if we will have to remain with this $30 cost increase for the next year.
Hopefully. Thank you very much, Jose.
Okay.